next behavior that's crucial for problem solving is creativity over capital. Creativity is using our brain power and our ingenuity to come up with new solutions to problems. Capital is throwing resources at the problem, whether that be people or technology or equipment or vendors. So they're very different pathways to solve almost every problem. Now, the reason this matters is that the set of solutions that we come up with through problem solving makes a difference. It's not just whether or not we solve the problem or how quickly we solve the problem, but what the end result is. If this didn't matter, then problem solving wouldn't really be a competitive advantage, and we certainly know that it is. Now, why this is so powerful and the contrast between creativity and capital is that creativity begets more creativity. Capital diminishes capital. The more we use capital, the less of it we have. The more we throw money and resources at problems, the less we have for the next problem. But creativity works the opposite. The more we engage our individual and collective creativity, the more we build it as a strength, as a muscle, through practice. And we ultimately build a creative organization. This only happens through practice. This only happens by exercising the muscle. The creativity begets more creativity. Now, fundamentally, organizations create economic value primarily through the cash that they can generate, whether they reinvest that cash or spin it out. And if we use our cash to solve all of our problems just to run the business, then we have fundamentally created less economic value. The organization that can master creativity over capital ultimately is destined to deliver more economic value to their customers, to their shareholders, and to their employees. One of the methods I like to probe on is one of my favorite questions, which is, what was your second favorite solution? Whether somebody's presenting a solution in a boardroom or I'm coaching somebody through problem solving, and they showed me the solution they've generated. What was your second favorite? Now, this usually throws people off guard, but it's meant to. First, sometimes, in fact far too often, people have actually a first favorite that they didn't share. They shared the safe answer. They might have shared the capital-intensive answer because it's a known solution for a known problem. And no one ever got thrown out for putting this solution out because we know it works. But the truly creative solution, the one that might even sound a little crazy, the one that might make you think, they didn't even share. Why? Might have been fear of rejection, fear of looking differently, worry that it wouldn't quite work as well. But for whatever reason, their actual favorite answer wasn't shared. And this question is basically posed to help draw that out. But more often, when I ask that question, there is no second favorite solution. There was never a list. There was only one idea, the first idea, the most obvious idea, and likely the most capital-intensive idea. And so this question helps me probe, did people even practice creativity in trying to come up with good solutions for this problem? Ultimately, that is how we know whether we have really good solutions or just the first available one. Now, how do we practice our creativity? Well, the most common method is brainstorming. And I don't particularly love that word. I think it's been tainted a bit by some bad practices that people use, and it was created decades ago to essentially be a term for organized ideation. I actually prefer the term ideation, but it really doesn't matter what word you use. The practice is fundamentally the same. The idea is you are trying to come up with as many solutions as possible, because as you go through that, you start to learn more and more creativity comes out. Now, no matter whether you end up with 3 solutions or 30, this plain fact is very hard to avoid. The first set of solutions you come up with are usually the most obvious. They're the ones anyone could have come up with. Then we start, if we decide to keep pushing, with some impossible solutions. Ones that might work, but we'll never get them implemented. And only after pushing through those do we start to come up with the creative solutions. Now, I wish there was a shortcut for this, to jump straight to the creative, and sometimes there is a eureka moment where that happens. But an awful lot of the time, you have to push through the obvious and push through the impossible to get to the truly creative answers. So that is why brainstorming or ideation is fundamentally important, however you decide to practice it for yourself individually or as a team. So as we do this, part of coming up with multiple ideas doesn't mean that you don't steal shamelessly. Doesn't mean that you don't adopt ideas that have already been used. You don't need to invent a new solution. The adoption itself is creative. As an example, I was working with an organization that was working on their changeover time, and part of this was pulling vacuum on a particular chamber. Now, the time it took to pull a vacuum really depended on the volume of the chamber. Most of that space wasn't needed. Most of it was sort of extraneous based on the construction of the equipment. How do you reduce the volume? Well, you're not going to build a new chamber. That's the capital-intensive solution. So they adopted a solution. Anyone knows that if you want to reduce the water consumed in a toilet tank, you put a brick in the back of the tank, and it displaces some of the water, and therefore less is used. They do the same thing. They put some metal blocks in areas of the chamber that weren't needed, and ultimately the volume required was less, and it took less time to pull vacuum. They adopted an idea that they had seen, that everybody's seen, and adopted it to their situation. Persistence is another pathway for creativity. Worked with a team that, because their equipment of what they were building was so big and so hard to move, it actually required a flatbed to move it from one stage of work to the next. And so this flatbed truck, because they only had so much capital, was also used for other purposes and was out on errands when they needed it to actually move the equipment. The first obvious answer, and the capital-intensive one, was buy another truck. Didn't take very long in terms of problem solving to come up with that one, but this organization didn't have more capital. And so buying another truck was immediately rejected. Through persistence, they kept working down the capital-intensive pathway to the free option. What they did is they actually found some red paint, they found some white paint that they already had in storage, mixed it together and created pink paint. And they painted the truck pink. Now, it still could be used to run errands, but only when absolutely necessary, because nobody wanted to take a pink truck out on an errand unless they absolutely needed to. This was a free and creative solution that improved the availability of the essential equipment within their process and cost them nothing but time, creativity, and persistence to have that creative idea. So don't ignore, in addition to volume, the idea of adoption and the idea of persistence in the pursuit of creative solutions. Now, part of that problem-solving process and part of the creativity is selecting the idea that you want. How do you select the idea from many that you have? Well, some you're going to discard because they're not feasible. Some you might not have the budget for because they were the capital-intensive ones, but fundamentally, you should have more than one potential solution. Well, the most common way is to evaluate against criteria. You develop some criteria, which I have to say should always be developed before you get to solutions. Often it's not, but it should be developed before you get to the solutions. But either way, there's still a bias. There's still opinion in ranking your solutions against the criteria. So even better than that, which is a great start, is test. Take your ideas and put them to the test. Now, to do this, you're really evaluating your solutions against reality. But you want to find the quickest, cheapest, and easiest way to do that test. How can you take 2 or 3 ideas that are really close to each other and break the tie on which one wins? Find a cheap, easy, and quick way to test each of those ideas. If you ideate, compare ideas, test them, and repeat, ultimately you start to learn which ideas are most effective because you've tested them against reality. This helps fuel effective creativity because you start to learn and create a feedback loop for the many ideas that you generate. Ultimately, this form of practicing and evaluating your creativity leads to more learning and leads to more knowledge. So the distinguishing path between one problem solver and the other is those that can use their creativity to develop their solutions and not just adopt the capital-intensive, expensive, obvious solutions that are in front of everybody's nose. We often didn't need problem solving for that. Practice creativity and bring new ideas to the table to overcome each one of your problems.